All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Uh, I hope that this is going to be an informative and helpful webinar for you. My name is Don Ewles, and I'm the grants manager for Saskatoon Community Foundation. And I do want to start by respectfully acknowledging that Saskatoon Community Foundation is situated on Treaty 6 territory and that the City of Saskatoon and all the people here are beneficiaries of this treaty. Treaty 6 is the ancestral and traditional territory of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, Dene, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of all First Peoples of Canada who've cared and lived with the land for generations that enriches our vibrant community in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. We're grateful to the knowledge keepers, past and present, for their sharing of the land and its rich history. And on this cold Saskatchewan morning, I think that we should also take a moment to think of those who don't have a way to get inside and who are not sharing as many of us do in the great quality of life that this community can afford many of us. So these are issues that we all have to be involved in solving, and I hope you don't mind me just taking that personal moment. The name of our session today is creating effective grant applications. And I do want to start by telling you just a little bit about the Community Foundation. And okay, how do we advance this thing? Here we go. Everything is a little bit different. Okay, second slide. Awesome. We're off and running. So, at the Community Foundation, we have a vision of a vibrant community where everyone belongs. And I think that aligns with what I was saying just a moment ago. Our job is to steward philanthropy and to help every donor create their enduring legacy through charitable giving. And a lot of what that has to do is to connect with you people who are joining us today and the many other community-based organizations in the community. You produce the social good and the outcomes that help to make our community that vibrant place where everyone belongs. And we could not do what we do for our donors if we didn't have you as our partners. So what are we going to cover today? Those of you who know me well will know that I can speak a barrage at a rapid pace, and there will be lots of information today. But like I said, I do want to leave some time for questions and answers, and I'm always here, folks. Get in touch with me by email, give me a phone call. That's what we're here for, is to help you understand how to produce the strongest possible applications, to articulate what your organization can offer, and to help us build that community. So today we're going to cover doing your advanced research and understanding your prospective funders. I will focus a little bit about community foundation funding, but actually what I'm going to say can apply to almost any kind of grant application. And in my career, I've been involved in federal funding, provincial funding, municipal funding. I've sat on a city committee. So I've seen lots of applications, let's just say. And what I'm going to say is probably good advice in any of those kinds of contexts. So we'll talk about what you need to figure out before you start seeking funding, how you get ready to apply, making sure that you're eligible and gathering the resources you're going to need, how you should describe your project, how you talk about measurement outcomes and impact, and creating a clear, common sense, and balanced budget. Really, that's important. Doing your follow-up reports, and we'll have a little bit at the end on some common misconceptions, things that I've heard from applicants over the years that are not helping them, and nevertheless, they are ideas that come up. So, before you start down the path of submitting an application, you should look into your funder. What kinds of projects have they funded in the past? Are these projects like your project? And when I say are they like yours, I don't only mean the themes of your work, but are they on the same level, in terms of the investment, the size of the grants, things like that. So, what are the focus areas? Do you fit? Um, it can be really a challenge for funders like us when we have a very specific funding stream and people try to find a way to sort of shoehorn their way into it. So, for example, one of the programs we help with is the Step Up for Mental Health Fund. And, people will try to make any kind of connection. Cultural cooperation creates a feeling of well being, therefore, it's mental health. Exercise, nature, art creates mental health. And while there's a truth to all of that, there are better and worse fits for the focus areas. And sometimes you're trying too hard to make sure that you can approach every funding opportunity, and really the odds of success are somewhat limited based on what you're offering. So think that through, because I know as well as you do, I spent a number of years working at smaller organizations and being an applicant. You don't have unlimited time, so you have to use your resources wisely, meaning your own time. Where are they funding? Are you in the right geographical region? Is it rural versus urban? Are you too narrow for them? Are you too broad for them? How much are they granting? All those kinds of ideas are important. Uh, when you're getting ready to apply, I'm going to tell you, folks, I know that many applications don't come in till right at the deadline. Many of them don't get started very far ahead of the deadline. And that's where people run into problems, because if they suddenly need something from their finance guy, and he's not in that day, or he's in, Aruba because it's January and it's minus 30, I don't even know how cold it is. Whatever the reasons are, if you're at deadline time and you don't have what you need, you can get yourself in a panic, and it's not going to lead to the best results for you. So gather your stuff before you start. It's a really good idea. So have you checked for all the correct information, including the deadlines, the grantor's current policies, the eligibility requirements of the funder, and deadlines. I'm going to tell you that 26 years ago, this month, I missed a deadline that cost around 20% of my organization's annual budget, uh, because I had written something down wrong. This is before I had really gotten into the internet as much, and I wrote things in paper notebooks, as we old folks do. And yeah, I wrote something down wrong, and it cost me a lot. So you've got to be very careful. As you can see, that mistake is still stinging me these many years later. Can you deliver your project within the required time frame specified by the funder? Some of the federal funding we got, especially through the COVID time, required that you complete your project by a certain time. And with the feds, there's no extension. They'll make you pay that money back. So make sure you're in good, shape in terms of fitting what the funder needs there. Also, gather all your supporting documentation. Have you got your financial statements? That is to say, signed and approved by your board of directors, a complete financial statement. Have you got your organizational budget? Have you got your project budget? Have you got your board list? If you've got it all ready, then it's just a couple of clicks to upload it. You will have noticed on that previous slide that I said deadlines about 4 times. Obviously, it's a thing for me. Our typical deadlines are actually the firsts of these months, but because they fall on a Sunday this year, I've adjusted them to the Monday, the 2nd of February for Youth Endowment Saskatoon, and Monday, the 2nd of March for Vital Focus grants. I found that just, the the challenges that people can run into with a Sunday deadline aren't worth the extra work that it causes us here in the office. It's easier to just keep it open and have a way of talking to you and helping you solve your problem on a work day. So it's Monday the 2nd of February and Monday the 2nd of March for Vital Focus grants. Just be aware of it. You were warned. Okay, continuing to gather your stuff. Have you made sure that your organization is eligible for funding? The Community Foundation at this time can only fund qualified donees as defined by the Income Tax Act. So, for the most part, what that means is registered charities, municipalities, and some other bodies that perform a function of municipal government, like some tribal councils and First Nations. So if you're not eligible, why would you get into doing a whole bunch of work? It's just not going to go forward. If the same project was denied funding in the past, did you find out why? Now, I want to start here by saying that the number one reason that projects don't receive funding doesn't actually have anything to do with your grant application. It has to do with the fact that there are always many more requests for funds than there are funds. And here at the foundation, our main programs are typically oversubscribed about 3 to 1. That means we have to say no to two in order to say yes to one. So while today's session will be about making your application as effective as possible, just realize that if you've been denied funding, the reason might be that we didn't have enough funds to fund everything. But you should still try to find out, because if there's a reason, if the budget wasn't balanced or if there was something problematic there, you want to find out what happened so you can make adjustments or decide that you just aren't a fit and not do the work and not apply. If the project involves partners, have the partners been consulted and have they agreed on clear roles and resources contributed to the partnership? I make a point of this because when we talk about partnerships here at the foundation, we typically mean that there are resources involved, not just, we refer people to your agency when we think you can do them some good and you refer people to our agency. That there's a lot of cooperation in the sector, and I get that. But a partnership is when you're both involved in the delivery of a program and you have responsibilities, and even staff time means resources. So there needs to be that clarity in order to really be ready and not have a hiccup come later in the process. Have you checked to ensure that no one else from your organization is applying and therefore competing with your application? I actually know factually that there's one person on this call, at least one. I'm not exactly sure who all is on the call, but I know factually that there's at least one person on this call whose organization has two applications on our system right now. And I will talk to this organization and hopefully we'll sort out what should happen. But you don't want to be competing with your own organization, especially because what can happen, and I've seen it happen, is that there are two applications from an organization. We fund one, but we fund the one that wasn't in as dire need of the funds. And so the one where they have the most need went unfunded, and they had plenty of funding for the other programs. So it can cause challenges. I think another important point here, though, is make sure that you allow yourself more than a few days to complete the application and submit it. I mentioned this earlier, but I've seen so many applications that start on the deadline day, that start on the afternoon of the deadline day. And what happens when you write that way is you're going too fast and things will be missed. In the earlier part of my career, I taught writing. I was a freshman English instructor at the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Regina. And when I was writing papers for myself, and what I advise my students is, you've got all your ideas in your head. You know they're complete and consistent in your head. And so you write some stuff and you believe that that matches what's going on in your head. But you need to leave it alone for a couple of days and look at it again, and then you'll see where the gaps were. You'll read it as though you're another person who doesn't have all those ideas organized and ready to go inside your head. And then you'll figure out, oh, I should probably mention this, or I should explain this, and here's a particular challenge of mine around the office. My CEO reminds me often not to use so many acronyms and sets of letters. Explain what those letters mean, because I may not know what EMDR is, or I may not know what CIF is. Our application review committees are knowledgeable people, but they may not know all the things that you know about the area you work in, the kinds of abbreviations you use. So, those are the kinds of typical things that you'll later realize I could have explained this better. Okay. That kind of brings us to describing your project. And I will say that because we need to respect our volunteers, we do put word limits in the sections in our application. And, and they don't have unlimited time to review the many, many applications that they'll have to review and make a determination on. I think that we leave a fair amount of space. But what can happen in some cases is that applicants will spend a lot of time explaining why it's important that their mission succeed. And so, just going to give you a really blunt kind of example. Don't tell us why we need to feed hungry children. We get that. For the most part, we get why your missions are important, and we know you believe in them. But a grant application is a request for money. And so we want to know what you are going to do with our funds. So use the majority of your space to focus on what you're going to do. So if you need to tell us, studies show us that if we feed children in a school breakfast program, they're more likely to achieve grade 3 reading level, which is a key indicator for future academic success. Then say that in a sentence or so, but spend most of the time telling us how many children you're going to feed. At what schools will you feed them? What will you feed them? How many times will you do it? And what the outcomes are going to be. That's what we want to know. Okay, so focus on what you're going to do. Be clear about the activities that are going to be part of the project. How many people, how many times, where, what. Likewise, many applications will ask how you fit the focus areas. So in quality of life, we have actually fairly broad focus areas: belonging and inclusion and reconciliation. And so an awful lot of what charitable organizations do in the community fit that in some way. In some ways, you could think of belonging as a lens, right? Whether it's about how the elderly participate fully in the good life in our community, or new Canadians, or people who are economically vulnerable, or people who are living with disabilities and health conditions. Other programs, for example, Youth Endowment Saskatoon, each year our Youth Advisory Council picks its particular focus areas for what it wants to fund. This is what our youth group sees in its view of the community, and we respect that. And so they decide how they want to focus things. So although all the grants will be about children and youth, they have areas that they want to work in. So you want to figure out how you align with that. And if you remember the example I gave about the Step Up for Mental Health Fund, it's going to work out better if there's a clear alignment that makes the most sense, right? So sometimes things are broad, sometimes things are narrow. And if you think of the 3 focus areas we have for our Vital Focus Granting program, which are equity, homelessness, and mental health, sometimes focus areas intersect with each other in major ways, because most people who are chronically homeless are equity seeking individuals because they're economically vulnerable, because the majority of homeless people in our community are Indigenous and they're equity seeking on that basis. Many of them have addictions and mental health problems. And, so those three focus areas interact with each other. Many applications nowadays, and so does ours, will ask you, what's your approach? What's your model? What's your methodology? What's your strategy? The language varies from application to application, but what they want to know is how will the activities you described be effective in achieving the outcomes? How is this a good way to get something done? And it can vary. Sometimes things are very straightforward, and sometimes they're a little bit harder to understand. And so if you explain how you're going to achieve your results. A great example from a program that I'm not sure if it's still running, but many years ago there was a program called Narrative Therapy, and it was actually an improvisational theater program. And the purpose was to reduce intimate partner violence. And it wasn't easy to understand how this worked, but the way it worked is that everybody's got a story, and that's the narrative, right? The story that you tell about yourself. And through interactive exercises, they would teach usually men, because men are responsible for the majority of that type of violence. They would teach men to tell themselves a new story. The story would go, I used to be the sort of man who would hit my partner, but now I've learned and I understand things better. I've learned tools to control my anger, and I'm a different person. And telling yourself that story makes it part of your identity, and it's proven to be an effective way of reducing intimate partner violence. Interesting. Not something I knew before I saw that application. So sometimes an explanation is really important. How are you going to get to where you need to get to? Okay. Next section. So in my mind, there are three really important pieces to every grant application. Describing your project. Tell us what you're going to do. The second one is talking about what you will achieve. So talking about measurement, outcomes, and impact. I'm kind of a simple-minded person, so I like simple explanations of things. So here's a simple framework to understand this. You want to be aware of the differences between outputs, outcomes, and objectives or goals. And again, your language can vary. It's just a way of thinking about different categories here. But outputs, for the most part, are what you will deliver, what you will do, what will happen. Okay? The outcomes are the results that are created because of your outputs. So in other words, after you do what you do, what will change for a person who's participating or receiving a service or however it works in your organization? And then the objectives or goals are the broader social changes that can result when you produce these outcomes. So here's a quick example. Look, folks, this is just one example among hundreds, right? So you'll have to figure out how this maps onto your type of project, which may be very different. But here's an example, teen parenting classes. So 25 teen parents attend the series of 10 classes. Even there, right, realize that your outputs may not be as projected because you've got 10 classes, 25 teen parents, therefore 250, right? 250 instances, except they may not all attend all of the classes, and there may be good or bad reasons why you don't have a 100% success rate. That's okay. It's not necessary that everything that you hope will come true from a project will. And in fact, it very rarely happens that way because we're all humans and things don't always go perfectly. Nevertheless, after they attend the classes, which is your outputs, the outcomes could be something like, and by the way, if there's somebody out there from an organization that does this kind of work, I'm sure you could probably say this better than I am here. But the outcomes could be things like the teen parents learn new skills to help them deal with the children's behavior and growth. They improve their own emotional responses and reactions, maybe anger management. They're connected to resources to help them cope with future challenges. Those could be the outcomes. And then the objective would be healthy, happy families with well-adjusted, well-socialized children. Okay? So here's the next slide is kind of a silly example, but I want to stop here for a quick second. Let's say we're going to do anti-racism training, and we're going to deliver anti-racism training sessions to 10 businesses. So what are the outputs? Remember, even the outputs might not be realistic. Who from these businesses will attend? Will it be everybody who is employed there? Will it just be the executives? Will the costs end up being higher because venues are higher cost by the time you get there, and you can only really do 8 sessions? So you have to estimate what your outputs will be and try to make sure that that's realistic. I actually had an applicant for a recent program, and they were doing kind of a public awareness thing that was a web-based situation. And so they said that the outcomes would be almost infinite. And I want to tell you, that's not helping you, right? Be realistic. Sometimes the numbers that you serve aren't looking super high, right? Some organizations deal with people who have been harmed in really dire ways, and they try to support them in really complex and detailed ways with a lot of support. So sometimes the numbers are low, but the impact of those outcomes is very high. So what's a realistic, expectation for what your outcomes are? So think about this for a second. What are the actual outcomes of anti-racism training? Is it that, we eradicate racism? Yay for us. Probably not, but maybe participants will be more aware of how racism is baked into systems and policies in our community. Maybe people will become more open to culturally diverse coworkers and interact more civilly. Maybe there'll be a reduction in incidents of racist language or attitudes. So you got to think about what you can measure here and what will really change. Okay, I know this is not a perfect example, and the last point is kind of jokey, but that's where we do have to be realistic and say, what can we really achieve? It would be great to say that we can end poverty, that we can end racism, but most likely your project will take steps toward the ultimate objectives or goals that you want to achieve. Okay, so if you're realistic about what you can achieve, then we're more likely to believe that you can achieve it. Okay, so you want to have a system for evaluating your program objectively. You want to present measurable outcomes whenever possible, rather than subjective or anecdotal reactions to the program. If possible, you want to have outcomes rather than outputs, but it just depends. Sometimes all you're able to measure is outputs, and that isn't necessarily going to mean that your project won't be funded. But if you can show change, it makes your application stronger. Satisfaction surveys are not really outcomes. But if you use surveys, you can use surveys to measure change. You can say, what are your attitudes or feelings, or how do you feel about things before, and how do you feel about things after you participate in the program? And you can say, this is what's changed for that person. We know that we work in a kind of a psychosocial area in a lot of cases, where it's about how people are feeling, what their emotions are, what their perceptions of community are. So while there's nothing wrong with satisfaction surveys or testimonials, if you can measure some kind of a change, you're probably going to have a stronger application. Try for the most part to talk about direct impact. on the people who are participating, but sometimes indirect impact is important too. So, for example, we funded babysitting training programs from time to time. And, the people who participate directly in the program learn a skill, they learn a way of earning some income, but the indirect outcomes there are also important, right? The kids that they care for are kept safer and are less likely to have problems. Maybe they're helping their family economically, allowing mom to work. I don't know. There are lots of indirect outcomes that can be very meaningful as well. Try not to overstate your numbers or confuse or obscure the number of times a service is used with the number of separate individuals who are requesting a service. Yes, it could make your numbers look a little bit smaller, but if they're real, that's what we're interested in. Okay. We're typically interested in a profound impact on a small number of people just as much as a superficial impact on a large number of people. There are lots of different ways that things can have a good impact on community. And sometimes you're dealing with a small number of people who have really dire needs. Sometimes you're dealing with something like, say, an anti-bullying campaign in high schools. And you have posters, and many students will see them. But the individual impact of seeing that message on each student is relatively small. So just give us a fair picture of what you're measuring and what that change is. The third really important, perhaps most important piece of a grant application is creating a clear, common sense, and balanced budget. Okay? Always remember a grant application is a request for money. And so the budget is really important because this is where you're really going to tell us what you're going to do with the money. And clarity and accuracy of the budget is very important. Errors in a budget are among the most likely reasons that a decision will be made to not fund, versus, like I said earlier, a lot of what isn't funded through our programs isn't it doesn't happen because we make a decision to not fund something. It's because we have only so much money, and so we can only fund these ones that we think are the best, I guess, the best buys for us, the most good that we can buy with the funds that we have. That may sound a bit crass, but we have to make those hard decisions. So if there's a problem, that's often how an actual decision to say, no, this isn't going to get funded, can happen. So if there are errors, or if the budget isn't balanced, or it just doesn't make sense, that's a problem. A budget should contain a complete funding plan for the project. So what does that mean? It means it contains a complete description of revenues. Nowadays, our projects that we have, for the most part, are expensive. Life is expensive, staffing is expensive, and so it's pretty rare that our $10,000 or $20,000 grant is going to cover all the costs involved in providing an important community project. Not always, because there can be small projects that can be funded 100% from a grant, but don't hive off just a tiny portion of a larger project to say this is what the grant fund is about, and not tell us the whole picture. We want to see what piece of the project that we're going to be supporting, but we also want to see what is the project going to do. So if you have grants that you hope to get from other funders, but you don't have them yet, that's not necessarily a problem, right? Just as long as the funding plan makes sense. So if you say you're going to seek $10,000 from us, you're also going to approach the city of Saskatoon or the United Way for 10,000, and you've received that funding in the past from one or other of these funders, that still can make sense. And depending on who you're applying to and where it is in your annual cycle, you may or may not have these revenues confirmed at the time that you apply to this funder, whether it's us or some other funder. So don't worry too much about that as long as it makes sense. But if you have, 10, you're doing like a $10 million capital project and you're asking us for $10,000 and you're also going to ask Nutrien for $1 million, but they've never worked with you before, that's not going to make sense. That's a ridiculous exaggeration, but I have seen things like that where, there's never been prior funding to this type of work or project by this funder, but they're asking them for a big piece, and it just doesn't sound like it's going to come true. I've also recently talked to somebody. This was to do with the recent version of the Step Up for Mental Health, and there was a major funder coming in for a major project. And they had never worked with them before, but they had good assurances that things were going to go forward. So we had a talk, and it did make sense. But don't summarize a significant proportion of the revenues. I've seen many, many grant budgets where the revenue side looks like Saskatoon Community Foundation, $10,000. Other grants and fundraising, $80,000. In order for us to know that this project can work, we need to know where you're getting that. Are you getting a few $1,000s from your annual bake sales or things that you do, or from your gala? Are you going to bring some donor money into this? Are you going to approach this and that funder for pieces of it? If the plan makes sense, then it's more likely to be supported. Similarly, on the expense side of your budget, give clear details as much as you can on the major categories of your expenses. Don't lump too much together. Here's another true example of a budget that I have seen. $30,000 program. Staffing costs, 17,000. Program costs, 13,000. You can give a little bit more detail on that. How many staff hours at what cost? What are the program costs? Is it a venue? Is it food? Is it program materials? Give us a little bit of an idea of what's going on. Remember, a budget is an estimate, but that doesn't mean it can't be an estimate based on experience and a real investigation of actual costs. So when you see a budget that's all round numbers, 3,000, 2,000, 5,000, you know probably that applicant is just ballparking stuff. If you see that they have, sought out quotes and they know it's going to be $3,480 for something, there tends to be a sense of, okay, that's probably a real cost estimate. So I get that you can't always have a quote for everything. I get that you do have to estimate some things. But if you can break it down a bit and be relatively clear about the major categories of your expenses, then the budget will make sense. Okay. We don't care how many paper clips you're going to use. That's not important. But, how much will go toward administration support? How much will go toward transportation? These are important aspects of how you're going to deliver on your project. If you're able to, be clear what portions of the expenditures are covered by the grant if we award it. So in some cases, for example, the complete funding picture of a project has staffing in it, but the staffing is covered off by a provincial grant that you have or provincial funding that you have or federal, I don't know. So if you can be clear, okay, our staffing is covered by this funding, but we need your help for the program delivery or for transportation to get participants to the program. That gives us a clearer idea of what you're asking us for, and we can make a clear decision on when we want, whether we want to be involved in that, or whether it is the highest priority. Because again, and I can't say this too many times, almost all of the applications that we get in here at the foundation are good. Almost all of them are fundable. And we simply aren't able to fund all of them. And so we have to figure out some way of deciding what we will do. Okay. And, the best you can do is be clear, honest, upfront, and direct about what you'll do, what you'll produce from doing that, and what that's going to cost. I do want to stop here for a minute to talk about follow-up reports. Historically, during my time at the foundation, and I've been here for a little over 17 years now, this is an area where organizations probably spend the least sincere effort to do a good job. Follow-up reports very often are done like checking a box, in with the most basic do the least you can to get it done kind of attitude. It's not great. I'm not looking to create extra work for you, but I want you to realize that granting is a relationship and it's ongoing in most cases. You're not coming to us one time, and you will probably want another grant in the future if we fund you this time. Reporting's your responsibility. It's something that you agree to as a condition of accepting the grant. There are some grantors who hold back a portion of the funds pending the completion of the reporting, right? So really, you want to do a good job, okay? Um, it's not necessarily a problem that you didn't achieve all of your objectives or your goals. We get it. Life is messy and things don't always go the way you planned. Things can change in the middle, or maybe you were just too optimistic about how many people would be participating in the program. That's okay. What is important, though, is to acknowledge what happened, to understand how you would probably want to improve the program going forward, or to adjust your expected outcomes going forward. Um, I mean, it would be great if we could all just do one project and solve one social problem and be done with it, but that's typically not how it happens. But if you're timely with your reporting, if you give a complete report back, and if you're candid with us about what did and didn't go well, that's actually that counts a long, long way toward getting a grant for a subsequent version or for a new or different project. Okay? Um, so just realize that granting is a relationship. It's not a one-off. It's not a one-night stand, right? I want to hope that I know most of the people who are on this call, and if I don't know you, I will get to meet you at some point, and I will know what's happening in your organization. And we want to be that close if we can. But we all have limits, right? The foundation has limits, and there are limits to our staffing and the time we have to reach out to you as well. So the follow-up reporting is a part of maintaining that good relationship, and it is important. I know this from every funder that I've worked with, in terms of serving on their committee or partnering with them in funding. It's important. So I think I've repeated myself enough times there. Hey, here's a fun couple of slides. I want to mention this. Everything on this slide and the next one are things that I have heard from applicants. And these are attitudes that they've had. And when people make these conclusions, they're not helping themselves. I hope you'll pardon the occasional pauses. It is so dry right now. I don't want to start coughing, so I'm taking ample sips of coffee while I speak. But a no to your project, or even more than one no, doesn't mean that we don't like you personally, and I have heard that. It doesn't mean we don't like your organization or your mission, right? It doesn't mean that we think the project is bad. It doesn't mean that we'll never fund the project. It doesn't mean that we'll never fund any project of yours. And it doesn't mean that you did something wrong. I want to stop on that one because very often when people have an unsuccessful application for funding, they come back to me and they say, "What did we do wrong? How would we change the answer?" Right? Like the application is an exam and they got, 70%, but they want to get 80% next time or something. It's not really that you did something wrong. And I sometimes can talk to you about some of the things that I've mentioned earlier in this presentation uh, in, o- in order to help strengthen your application. But it's not about you did something wrong in most cases. It's not about if you gave a better answer, you get funding next time. It's about there's this pool of applicants. Each time it's a different committee, each time it's a different pool of applications, and we have a certain amount of funds that we can grant, and we make what we hope are the best decisions we can. And, your best approach is to see if you can find out if there's something you can improve and keep trying. Really, that's the best advice I can give in most cases because we don't think any of those things. We don't dislike you. We don't dislike your organization. We're not blocking you. You're not blacklisted. If we blacklist you, we'll let you know. If you misuse our funds or don't spend them for the purpose that we gave them, we'll let you know. But that actually has really almost never happened because you're all doing great things and we wish we could support it all. Okay. Other misconceptions about requests for support. Professional grant writers and superior writing does not necessarily equal a yes. It's true that if you're clear and efficient with your language, that's going to help. But our job is to read past that. You may recall me saying that I used to teach writing at U of S. But this is not an English paper, right? This is about what's going to happen out there in community. And our job is to read past that and figure out what's going to happen and how valuable is the work that you're proposing to do. Being a small organization doesn't prevent you from getting a grant, and being a big organization doesn't guarantee you'll get a grant, right? There are organizations who have grown because they're doing great work and they have been for a long time. And some of those organizations are longer term partners with the foundation. But being new, being small, serving a small number of people doesn't mean that you're not going to get a grant. It's about where you stand in the community, what you can do, what your relationships are. We support organizations of all sizes, big and small, based on the applications and based on their projects. So bottom line, well-developed, effective programs receive funding. I kind of talked about this slide earlier, so I guess I got ahead of myself. But I love this phrase in the first bullet here. I got this from Rhonda Spees, who used to be the community investment person at Potash Corp and Nutrien. She's now moved on to other great career opportunities. But she said, from a funder's point of view, Potash Corp liked to date before they get married. And so sometimes it's good to try out a smaller request or to try for a quality of life grant before you go for a multi-year grant. We like to get to know you before we overcommit. So sometimes you need to try more than once, but don't give up. Figure out what you can do to make your application as strong as it can be. Remember reporting, remember granting is more than just money. The money is just a means to see something happen. And we are trusting you when we grant to you to create change out there in the real world. So do your good work, communicate what you achieved, and get the next grant. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'll go to the last slide. You probably know this information, and hey, it's easy to find. But I want to come back to a point I made earlier, which is that I'm here, and so is my colleague Chris Hertzke. And between the two of us, we can answer most of your questions, and we can help you along your path to doing an effective application. The only question we really can't answer is, if I do X, will I get a grant? That's up to the review committee, but we can tell you what's happened in the past, what we think will make your application stronger, and we like to think that we provide pretty good advice. So if you're not sure, get in touch with us. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can see faces. And we've got a few minutes left before 10, and I want to throw it open to anybody who wants to ask a question. It's probably not a bad idea to toss your hand up, but I hope I will see that. I haven't really navigated this kind of thing with quite as many people as are on this call. So, any questions, folks? Any comments? Go ahead, Tracy.
Good morning, Don. Thanks for sharing all that information. Just wondering if you're going to make the slide deck available.
Uh, what I will make available is the recording. So that will contain the slide deck. How's that sound?
Sounds like a deal. Thanks, Don.
Okay. Any other questions? I know that it's been a barrage of information, but that's kind of how we get this done with respect for your time. I have done this type of a webinar in 2 hours, and that involves a lot more of my dumb jokes. So this was the economy version. Go ahead, MLA. You are muted.
I do that too often. Hi, I'm from United for Literacy. My question is, what are some of the most common writing mistakes you see in an application?
So that is a really hard uh, question to answer because we deal with so many different people who have different types of education, you know, different levels of writing skill, and you know, I could say so many things. But here's what I will say: if you're talking about how language is used as a writing mistake versus like a grammatical error or something like that, I would say being too abstract, vague, and general. And I have had, occasionally I've had an LOI where they're so broad about the overall goals that they want to achieve that I end up not really knowing, yeah, but what will you do?
Okay.
So try to use simple, concrete language. Obviously, there are going to be times when you need to explain a term, or there's some industry term, or there's some important idea in your work that requires a little bit of definition. So I get that, but for the most part, use straightforward, concrete language. We're going to feed kids oatmeal so that they have the nutrition they need to learn when they're in class. You know, it's hard to misunderstand that type of thing. But when people say we're going to optimize synergies to improve, communication across many platforms, I'm going, well, that sounds super, but what will you actually be doing? You know, is that a
Perfect. Thank
fair
you.
fair answer?
Perfect. Thank you.
So, and of course, that's kind of jokey language, and I'm not mocking any of you in the way that you present your ideas. It's not that, but it's sometimes I have a harder time getting a hold of. So, what does this mean is going to happen, and who's going to do it? That can be really important because sometimes there's just an old cookum on the block who takes care of the kids there, right? And that can be the most important connection in those kids' lives. That's the message that you've somehow got to get across. Who is it? And sometimes the person is important. Sometimes where they stand in community is important. So being as specific as possible is important. Any other questions before we ring off for today? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today. And if you're at all like I am, you may well think of your most important question sometime in the hour after the webinar ends. Because I always kind of get overwhelmed by information, and then, things settle down in the stew that is my brain, and eventually something bubbles to the top, and I go, "It's a carrot. I should have asked that." And then I want to circle back. So the message is you can do that. Shoot me a message, shoot me an email, uh, give me a phone call. I am more than willing within the time that we have to discuss your application with you. Uh, when I say within the time that we have, I'm just aware that it's the 22nd of January and some of those deadlines are coming up in about a week and a half. So, everybody's going to be racing to the finish line. Ask your questions sooner rather than later, right? On the afternoon of February 2nd, hey, my phone might be busy. It could happen. So, with that, I'm going to say thanks, everybody. I'm just going to take one last check here into the chat. I'm not seeing any questions. So, I'm going to end the session. But thank you all for the great work you do in community. Everything that you do at all of your organizations is appreciated, and it's been a wonderful experience for me to be able to be a part in some small way of so many of those projects just by getting to know you and seeing your applications and meeting you in person. It's a very rewarding kind of work that we all do, and I love to be part of all of it. So thanks a lot and have a great day. And for goodness sakes, try to stay warm out there. Bye now.